Welcome, everyone. How are you? Welcome to a very special program of Changing Tracks. Today, our guest is from the Philippines. Well, but she herself will tell us where she is now and more about herself. She has a very strong, it's a strong conversion story. But the Lord places each one of us on our path, and He takes care of us. That's the most important thing. Without further ado, here is January Donovan. January, how's it going? Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, your family, where you were raised?
My name is January Donovan, and I am married to Ryan Donovan, and we have number 5 on the way. My oldest is 7, and my currently youngest is 2. So we had them all in 4 years. Background: I grew up in the Philippines and moved here when I was 11, and it was culturally Catholic. I'd say that I knew our Lord on a personal level as a young child, but I didn't really know how to cultivate it. We did sort of the ritualistic Catholic things that you do as a culture, but never really sort of had a catechesis or understood my faith. And came here when I was 11. I didn't see my parents for 5 years straight, and came here at 11. And jump right into the American culture, and where you have life of abundance, there's incredible options, and all of a sudden you're faced with so many choices as a teenager. So God was always tenderly close, I would say, but I had no catechesis. I think I went to CCD once or twice, and it wasn't really until the end of my junior year that God really penetrated my heart.
And how did that happen? Was it little by little, or how do you think it happened?
Living in the Philippines was a real gift for me. I enjoyed my childhood and really just had a privileged life, in a sense that in the midst of poverty, there was a lot of joy. And so all through sort of moving here from the Philippines, I was always in search of that joy, and where the laughter and you just sort of wholesome fun. And I think it was my end of my junior year. High school, I went right into sort of typical high school. I ended up having my first relationship at 14, and I was in this relationship, I would say I was 14, and he was a really nice guy. Had a lot of fun with him, but I felt as though there was something really empty, and I didn't know why. I didn't know what was empty. I didn't think it could ever possibly God, because God's not in the radar when you're in high school. You're worried about what people think, you're worried about how you look, you're worried about boys, you're worried about all the things that that doesn't really quite matter, but matters so much in high school. And my junior year, I want to say it was my junior year, I kind of wanted to break up with my boyfriend. It was, I think, right about that time, almost 3 years, and I was just empty. And there was really no reason to be empty, because I was living this great life. My parents had sort of given me everything and too much, and great friends, sort of living the high school life that everybody wants to live. There was no reason why I felt empty, but I was. And to be honest, it wasn't as though I knew the word empty. I just know something. I don't think at high school it was empty or it was restlessness. So I wanted to break up with my boyfriend, thinking, okay, that must be it, I'm done. And in the process of breaking up with him, I got pregnant. I was probably, I want to say 16 or 17 years old. It was a shock to every part of my system. I knew that sex would be something that's sort of what everybody was doing, but pregnancy never even crossed my mind. It wasn't somebody ever told me. Nobody ever talked about sex or the sacredness of sex, or how you go live in your life being chaste or finding the right person. And all this was sort of coming to me at a head in a time in my life where I felt as though I was at the lowest point, because at that point my parents lost their job and my whole family was falling apart. There was just a lot of sort of family dynamics that just added salt to every possible wound. So I remember going to my guidance counselor and saying, what do I do? Where do I go? And she says, well, there's really no other option, and she sent me to an abortion clinic. And at that point, you're 16, or I think right before my 17th birthday. I mean, it's too much to process. And in my head, I knew it was life. I knew it was life, but I didn't know it was wrong.
How did you feel after your abortion? Did you feel guilty?
A lot of times when I speak to women, they feel so much guilt, but also they probably were not really taught that it was a sin or it was wrong, but they just automatically feel this guilt. And especially when you're not a practicing Catholic and you have no faith, all these emotions that you're going through, but you don't know why you feel guilty or bad. You just know something's not right. I remember really clearly crying on my bed and saying goodbye to my baby and just weeping and knowing I was walking into getting an abortion the next day. No clue even what the process of abortion was. And I remember walking in there and I was crying, the whole time. And you don't tell anyone. When you go through an abortion, it's such a shaming experience. It's not something you share with your friends or your family. Nobody knew. I think I told one friend and my boyfriend at that time. And, it was sort of my decision. First I wanted to break up with him. There was no way I could even begin to imagine of marriage or life. I remember walking in there and walking out knowing I just died. I can't explain it. It was part of me just died. I died with my baby. I remember the experience very clearly and very painfully. And 3 months later, in the midst of trying to break up again with the same guy, I got pregnant again. And at this point, it was too painful to even think of it as a baby. I didn't want to feel anything. I couldn't feel anything. I really just wanted to die. And I went through my second abortion, and at that point, really, I might have been alive, but I knew I was dead. I was dead at every part of me. I was dead inside, and it's an experience that you really can't put into words because it's life and death all at the same time. You receive life, and then life gets taken away from you. There's a real robbery that's happening. It was also that same year that somebody invited me to a retreat. And at this point, I think my second abortion was in February. Somebody invited me at March. I pulled away from my friends. I just didn't want to hang out with anyone. When a woman goes through something so excruciating with pain like that, you're sort of repulsed by everyone. And I never told my parents. I couldn't give them that agony because they were such great, wonderful people. I couldn't think that. I never wanted them to feel sort of the burden of feeling guilty for the choices I never knew how to make. And I blamed myself. And I was numb. I wanted nothing to do with it. I didn't want to talk about it. And I went to my first retreat. I didn't actually even know it was a retreat. My friend invited me to this sort of weekend. And it was in that weekend where they introduced God. And I thought, God? And so I wept the whole entire weekend retreat. And that's when I had my first ever Eucharistic adoration. And that was really the beginning. I'd say the beginning of a new life, that in my worst moment, I found life. In my own cross, I found my resurrection through the mercy of God. And it's only now that I look back on it where I realize God never left me. and that God loved me through the most horrific choices. And I know that now in a profound way as a mother, because there's nothing my children could ever possibly do that won't make me love them, that will make me love them less.
Okay, so on that retreat, we could say that your conversion began, that you really experienced God.
And my conversion really happened before the Blessed Sacrament. I spent the next, I gotta say, 10 years really healing before the Blessed Sacrament. I didn't know anything about God. And I remember in that same retreat, I met a priest, Father Dan, who ended up marrying us and baptizing all my children. He became my father, and he invited me to adoration every Sunday, and it was an hour and 15 minutes away. I had no idea what adoration was intellectually, but I knew when I walked in there, it was home. It was safe. I was loved. I didn't think I had the words then, but I experienced our Lord in ways that my mind didn't necessarily need to understand. And he was the one who invited me to go to Steubenville, and I really sort of laughed at him. I said, Steubenville, I'm going to business school, I'm going to Indiana with full scholarship, there's no way, you know. And so this was about March. I called Steubenville. I said, January, out of obedience, and I was learning what out of obedience was. As a spiritual director, I need you to call Steubenville. And here was feisty January. I called campus and I said, okay, my priest wants me to call you and thinks I need to be going to your school. And so can you tell me one reason why I should go to your school? And I still remember Matt, Angel, who probably has no idea what he said, but has changed my whole entire life. He says, here we have one thing in common, and that's God. And I remember those words rung in my ears, because at that point, after my senior year, it was just a year of suffering for me and a year of getting to know God. But you know, getting to know God your first year of brokenness was painful, because in order for God to come in, I had to break a lot of pieces of my heart. And the abortion, in so many ways, God makes so much good out of that, because in my woundedness, I had to come to God, and it was a gift. You know, my cross was also my compass to hope and to a new life with Christ. So that year, I remember my senior year, right before I went to Steubenville, I remember putting a cloth on my TV and changing it to an altar. Friday night, Saturday night, I was in adoration, and I remember there was this rumor going on that January was going to be a nun. I mean, I was homecoming queen junior year, and all of a sudden a nun my senior year. It was sort of like they didn't understand what was happening to me. I didn't understand what was happening to me. But, you know, I think a lot of my friends, and I look back on it now, they were very angry with what was happening, but I really didn't know what was happening. But as I look back, it was God inviting me to a deeper love. And I think since then, it's really been a love story. I didn't date after I broke up with that guy. I haven't really dated. I went on dates, but I never had a relationship until I met my husband. And I spent my 4 years in Steubenville, kind of giving my heart to God and learning how to do that, you know, because I think I knew that intellectually, but I really didn't know how to do it as sort of an everyday practice. So I had commitment for 3.5 years, and God was very clear. He said, January, I want 3.5 years of your life where you don't have a relationship. I've said, Lord, you're crazy. I'm going into college. There's supposed to be great guys in here, and this is where you just find your spouse, and you want me not to date. I said, Lord, you are not thinking this clearly. I love my relationship with God. I'm very clear with him, and he's very clear with me.
Tell us a little bit about that time in your life. How did you react? What went through your mind in that moment?
It was time of unlearning, I would say, where I had no clue how to be a woman. And it was him beginning to help me understand my dignity But this is sort of what I realize about my dignity as a woman, is that we begin to understand our dignity as an image, as an image of God as a woman, but we receive our dignity through our personal relationship with Christ. And I think it's two different sort of a journey that every woman has. For me, I was studying theology, I understood intellectually, but I actually had to receive His love daily through prayer, through adoration, and then practice it. And that was the hard part where, okay, God, now I receive, teach me how to nurture this so I can learn how to be a woman, because I had no role model. And until this day, I continue to thank this two couple, Terry and Dida, who, when I went to that retreat in my junior year, they invited me to this conference of, I think there was about 1,200 youth. And here I was, uncatechized youth, thirsty, got to know God. And then there was this couple who was so in love with God, but so in love with each other, had 3 children, and I was blown away. I thought, A, I've never seen great marriages. B, I've never heard of a man speak about his wife in a way where it knocked me off my feet of how much he admired her. It was just sort of all these new experiences of beauty between the love of a man and woman, and beauty. And so here's January. I don't know them. And somehow at the end of the conference, I made it a point to get to know them. And I said, for the next 3 years, I said, can I follow you? And so I followed them for the next 2.5 years in missions, wherever I could, spring break, summer. And I said, I need to study your relationship, because I don't know the first thing about love. And I said, I remember asking her to do that. I says, what do I need to do to have that kind of relationship? Because I really had never seen a beautiful marriage. And she looked at me point blank and she said, well, you need to learn how to be a woman, because you create that culture. And I looked at her completely blank because I had no idea what that meant. But now I do. I understand, that through observation and following them around, it sort of changed my heart. And I just watched her. And then I spent my time in Steubenville observing women, sitting with God, getting to know men, and change the way I thought of men, in healing. And I always thought that giving my life to God would end my life of joy, of freedom, and adventure. And I have never taken so many adventures, have never felt so free and joyful. And that our faith is so real and so rich and so joyful and so whole. And we have this false understanding of our faith is sort of, we understand it intellectually and we think we're giving it up. And we're gaining a world that is abundant. And I think if I had to tell women one thing, I said, just give God a chance. And He is going to surprise you with a love far greater than you ever imagined.
How did He surprise you?
And I want to cry when I think that, because I feel as though when I look at my life right now, being married to an incredible man, which I spent hours in adoration for, and God is never outdone in generosity. And I cried many tears. I was mad at God. Why hasn't He given me a man? I prayed, I've done my part, God. I mean, why can't you do your part? And He does. And in His time. And I prayed every day for my spouse, because that's what, you're told to do in Steubenville. And I was very clear and had an incredible spiritual director, a woman who was my mentor for 3.5 years, who really kind of worked my soul in more ways than one. I met her every month, and I remember my first homework was to make my bed every day and then go to adoration at 4:30 in the morning, which from a life of totally no God to that was my homework. It was like, excuse me? But I prayed for a really formed man, and not really thinking that. And when I met my husband, it was the easiest decision in my life. It was almost just like seeing the face of Christ and his fulfillment. And it's like God was saying, I can't give it to you until you're ready to receive it. And so he had to work on really uprooting me so I could really receive Christ's love through the many people around me. So I can't think of a greater adventure for a woman than to be a woman of prayer and a woman of love and a woman of sacrifice. And that our faith, if we live it, is going to bear fruits where every person, that's what my spiritual action says. It goes, January, you know when you're living a life of Christ, because everybody you meet, you nurture. And that is your goal, so that everything that I do, I'm able to do for God and with God and through God. So it's a great life.
Many women feel the need to be loved by a man. You found yourself a husband, you love him, he loves you. With all of this, do you still need God?
It's amazing when I think that when you've tasted the love of our Lord, it's almost as though it's this mark where you know when you're not spending time with God. And my husband wasn't a practicing Catholic when I met him, which is, I think, and it's another story in itself, but nothing ever replaces God when you know and you've tasted the love of God. And my husband knows it, I know it, and it's almost as though when I am not loving my husband with the love of Christ, I'm loving from a point of depletion as opposed to a point of generosity. And you feel it. You never stop needing God. And my husband always says it's like a triangle. You know, you grow in your personal prayer life and you nourish your marriage. So my husband and I really make an effort to have one-on-one time with God. And we call it our personal date with God. And we do it together in separate rooms. It's a commitment that we try to keep. It's not easy. But our Lord knows, especially, through the different stages of motherhood. But we both, I think, intellectually understand that nothing nourishes our hearts like God.
How do you live the faith together?
We really approach it in a very practical way where, every month, every year, every week, we assess, we have accountability. When are you going to, prayer? When are you going to adoration? When are you doing your spiritual reading? When are you doing your personal psychological reading? When are you doing human development? So it's a priority, but not always together. I kind of have to do it in different times. So, but adoration is a big part of my life because I feel as though it was my conversion. So, I think that my husband has really sort of joined in with me, and I'm so grateful that he sees both that need for, and I tell him, I said, Ryan, I just need to pray. And he knows those words where I'm thirsty, I'm empty, and you can't fill me, and God can. And it's just a journey, of helping each other kind of make it to God.
January, thank you very much. Thank you so much for your testimony, for your conversion, and for your limitless faith in the Lord. Thank you. Well, everyone, what January says is true. We've been taught a Catholic faith that says if you surrender your life to God, then you have to give up a ton of things, and you ended up losing. But what January says is true. We have been educated in this intellectual way of thinking, or maybe it's just a way of speaking. But in the end, we don't understand what these words really mean. Do you have to leave material things behind? Well, probably. But we don't lose. We win. We win. We win a ton of things. We win happiness. We win serenity. We win peace. we win our Lord. Our Lord is with us, and we are with Him. He becomes a part of our life and a part of our very selves. In conclusion, we don't lose, we win. So, which do you want? To win, right? You already know what to do. Thank you, and until next time.